You remember it wasn't long ago, Governor Bob Ferguson was bragging about, oh, we're on the right track when it comes to crime in the state of Washington. Well, it turns out we're not even a little bit, because the numbers tell a much different story. This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Make sure you sign up for their newsletter to be alerted to opportunities to do just that. Speaking of people getting involved, that's a good way to do that. So we had this is August 4th, Governor Bob Ferguson. We'd shown this on the show because at the time there had just been a double murder at a homeless encampment. There had been all these other crime issues happening in Seattle, like a homeless guy shot down at the waterfront. Governor Ferguson was sharing a story from King 5 News about crime rates drop in Washington for 2024. And he said, this is encouraging news. I appreciate our law enforcement professionals working hard to keep our communities safe. We must keep up the momentum. But in truth, even if we have small little improvements here and there in Washington state in certain subsets of crime, the picture as a whole is still very startling. And at this, last few years, when you have a lot of states, saw an uptick in crime, red states and blue states during the pandemic, a lot of states are moving in a much more positive direction, while Washington state, in some of the worst categories of crime, continues to have a very significant problem. I saw this report out, and I don't typically love these studies because you can see one study that says something one day, another study that says something another day, but there's been a couple of these out that we've done where it's ranking Washington state pretty consistently toward the bottom of the list when it comes to places to live or places to move. So this Wallet Hub study, Best States to Live in, it has Washington state as 36th. So we're pretty low on the list. And we were pretty low on the list the other day when we did a best states to move to, or states where most people are moving to. But what I found really interesting, not surprising if you're actually paying attention, is one of the main contributors to why we were 36th on this list is we rank dead last for their analytics for public safety. 50 out of 50. Think about that. We're supposed to be like this world-class state, don't compare us to all these other crime-ridden areas. 50th in public safety, Washington state. Portland and Oregon, not too far behind that. But again, not a surprise, because when you actually look into the data, whenever there's data around public safety, politicians will find and they'll pick out whatever is most politically advantageous. For instance, property crime numbers. In states like Washington, Oregon, California, they always want to say, oh, property crime is down, because they've made it so impossible for people to actually report property crimes. I mean, we have fewer and fewer police officers, and so people were waiting hours on end to make a report about property damage or theft even, so they just stopped doing it. They just stopped doing it. And that's as clear as day for anyone who actually cares to ask questions. For instance, there was a bunch of restaurants. We had that one, I can't remember what it was called, in the East Lake neighborhood of Seattle that had been broken into like 17, 18 times in a period of a couple of years. And they just stopped calling the cops. And they just, they're not reporting it to their insurance because they would lose their insurance entirely. So they're just eating it. And so because we have so few officers, 911 response times are so bad, people stop reporting crimes and even some violent crimes. And then the numbers go down and people like Bob Ferguson are like, yay us. It's like, no, this is actually a very, very bad thing. But on August 14th, the yearly FBI stats came out, and they aren't good for Washington state. They're very, very bad when it comes to the trajectory of our state in violent crime comparatively to other states. This is important because there are some areas where year over year we're seeing improvement. But you had the whole country basically during the pandemic that was seeing a spike in certain kinds of crime. And after the pandemic was done, these states got back to business and their crime rates are plummeting. So you see all these, mostly red states, crime rates are plummeting. And Washington states might go down a little bit, but comparatively to the drops we're seeing in other states, it's very troubling. So a couple of the statistics that the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs pointed out in this recent data comparing 2024 to 2023, the national murder rate is down 3.55% over that period of time. Washington's murder rate up 42%. So they might say, oh, well, year over year, first 6 months of 2025 for full years comparing 2023 to 2024, because of course we don't have a full year of data for 2025, our murder rate is up 42.46%, while the national murder rate is down 3.55%. That is startling. National violent crime rate down 6%. Washington violent crime rate up 8%. Aggravated assaults nationally up 2%. In Washington state, up nearly 20%. Vehicle thefts nationally up 16%. In Washington state, up 35%. And that would be even worse if we hadn't, in the second half of 2024, allowed police to pursue stolen vehicles again. Because our numbers started to improve after that. But they're even considering that last 6 months of the year, things were better. We're still in a significantly worse place than the national average. So Bob Ferguson has no business talking about we're trending in the right direction. No business talking about patting himself on the back for, putting $100 million toward law enforcement, which hasn't resulted in one single additional new police hire and probably won't. And at the same time, in Seattle, which is gearing up to elect a mayor that will be even softer on crime than the current mayor, Bruce Harrell. Like, Bruce Harrell hasn't been good for crime and public safety. He does a lot of dip, 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 and not a lot of action. But the woman who's likely to replace him, Katie Wilson, she's going to be much worse for crime. She's essentially a socialist. So I saw this article come across from King 5 News, and even King 5 News is reporting, the crime crisis is bad when King 5 News can't even ignore it. Their headline, Belltown shooting surfaces frustration among residents with crime wave. King 5 News is calling what's happening in Belltown a crime wave. There had been multiple instances of stabbing, attempted robbery. They said, according to the Seattle Police Department, overall crime in Belltown is up 32% this year, while shootings are up 42%. One of them was disturbing. There was this 24-year-old guy. He was shot in the hand because somebody tried to rob him. And then right after that, there was another guy stabbed in that area because he wouldn't give up his food. Somebody stabbed him because he wouldn't hand over his food. So we're seeing all sorts of insane crime happening in the Belltown neighborhood at a time when the city of Seattle is trying to elect, or probably poised to elect, someone who's going to be much softer on crime. Very concerning. And then you have, this seems to happen every week, where a grocery store is closing its doors because they keep getting stolen from. And they have such bad crime crises outside their door. They're spending a ton of money on security. And that is hurting what is a very, very narrow margin of profit. And I mean, remember we did the stories on the QFC up in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle that was locking up the ice cream? We did a few segments on this because I was like, oh my God, last thing I want when I go to the grocery store to get a pint of ice cream for a nighttime binge is to have to call someone over to open up the thing and say, hey, I want a pint of Ben & Jerry's. But things have been bad. There was news that another grocery store was closing. And I appreciate that Councilwoman Joy Hollingsworth, who represents the Capitol Hill area, I appreciate that she had a long post over the weekend that was pointing out some of the reasons that this is happening. She said when a community loses a grocery store, it doesn't just lose a place to buy food. It also loses a pharmacy people rely on, a community hub, a distribution point where food banks and meal programs pick up donations. She said, so why are stores closing? What's really happening? And she actually talks about these places have paper-thin margins. The cost of doing business in Seattle is very high, something she's acknowledging. And then she talks about the hidden cost of crime. She says stores rely on private security, cameras, secret shoppers to deter crime. In Seattle, some chains spend millions per year on theft prevention alone. Even blue lights in bathrooms to discourage drug use. All of that is part of the cost. She says it's not just theft, it's the price of preventing it that eats into already thin margins. Grocery stores keep their own data and don't usually report the attempted thefts or other disturbances at their stores. So we have members of the Seattle City Council who see this, who aren't fooled by, thefts have gone down. Even Joy Hollingsworth knows that these places have just stopped reporting it. That's how, it's gotten bad and people are so tired. when they just stop reporting crime. Can you imagine 10 years ago? Something happening to you, a crime, a theft, a mugging, somebody breaking in your car windows, even in Seattle, and just saying, I'm not reporting it. Even 10 years ago, that would have been like, what do you mean you're not reporting it? It's gotten, but I mean, I had a incident where a guy basically had tried to get in my car when I was in it. He was kind of a homeless guy. It was very weird, but I called the police immediately, right? And police got there within a couple minutes. This is like probably 15 years ago when I first moved to the city. If that happened to me now, I'm like, I'm not calling the cops. It's going to take the cops like 6 hours to get here. That guy's going to be long gone. I'm not going to bother with it. So you have people like Governor Bob Ferguson who don't want to confront that reality. They don't actually want to fight crime, right? All they want is for public perception of crime to be down so that they can get reelected. They don't care at all whether crime is actually down. So they'll ignore some of those clear indicators of, well, more people are saying they aren't reporting thefts and all this stuff, because he doesn't actually want to fight crime. He just wants you to believe that crime's not so bad. So he'll twist the numbers in any way he can, saying, oh, we're on the right trajectory. Even if homicides are up 46%, well, the rest of the nation is seeing a drop in homicides. And that's all because all he cares about are politics and not actually fighting crime. That segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Make sure you sign up for their newsletter to be alerted to opportunities to do just that.